Lieutenant, I want to ask you some questions about State's Exhibit number 9. You made reference to, in Officer Williams' statement, that he, and this is on the first page, paragraph number 6, while I was at the SO, no one in the SO ever raised any issue that I was initiating activity based on agenda. Did I read that right?
Which one's Exhibit 9? I apologize.
It's Officer Williams' written statement that he gave to you.
And which one am I looking at?
First page, paragraph number 6.
And what is the question again?
Did I read it correctly?
While I was at the SO, no one in the SO ever raised any issue that I was initiating activity based on age or gender.
Now, let's talk about that statement. There's two possibilities that happen when Officer Williams writes this out some 5 years after he was talking about it to the SO. One would be he's lying, right?
Did he lie to me? That's a possibility.
Okay. The other could be that when he wrote this, he did not remember that conversation, correct?
Is that possible? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, is that possible?
It's possible.
Okay. Now, I couldn't help but notice when you were talking about your examination of Officer Wills, you said that you asked her about a conversation she had with a lieutenant outside the court. Do you remember testifying about that?
Yes.
Remember what your answer was when you asked her about that?
She didn't recall that conversation.
Right. Was she lying, or did she just not remember?
Objection calls for speculation.
It's directly probative.
I'm not sure that I see the connection here. Can you rephrase your question?
Sure. When she made that statement, was she telling the truth?
Objection calls for speculation.
I'll have to sustain that.
Anyhow, you asked her something that occurred a while back, and she didn't recall it, did she?
Correct.
Can you sit here and tell this commission one instance where Officer Williams allegedly offered sex or a sexual favor in exchange for something?
No.
That is a very, very serious allegation, isn't it?
It is.
One of the things you have the option to do when you become aware of that, when someone's a police officer on LPD, if it relates to conduct while they're an officer, you can request the officer submit to a polygraph. True?
I'd have to look at our policy to verify that. I'm not sure.
You don't know.
I'm not sure.
Have you ever had an officer polygraph?
No.
You said this was your very first investigation of this type. Is that right?
Correct.
Again, looking at Exhibit 9, the very last page, page number 5.3, what it says is, I'm therefore requesting that someone who is not already biased against me, that someone who has experience in this specific type of investigation be assigned to replace Lieutenant Unruh. Is that what it says?
That's what it says.
You had zero experience in this type of investigation, true?
Correct.
Were you aware that, based upon the first meeting, that both the LPOA representative and Officer Williams believed that you were biased at that time?
No.
But it was communicated to you in writing of concern about bias, right?
Correct.
After you looked at all those numbers, before you sat down with Officer Williams, were you leaning one way or another?
I was hoping to obtain further information from Officer Williams during that contact so that we could begin to further decipher what these numbers are showing us.
My question was a little bit different, Lieutenant. My question was, before you sat down with Officer Williams, based upon the numbers that you had, were you leaning one way or the other?
They were concerned.
And my question is, were you leaning one way or the other?
At that time, no.
Okay. So based just upon the numbers and based just upon the people you talked to, no lean, that's your testimony, right?
Correct.
What's your highest level of formal education completed, sir?
Bachelor,
Bachelor of Science or Arts?
Science,
And
Criminal Justice for A State University.
do you consider yourself to be an expert in statistical analysis?
Absolutely not.
I want to talk about traffic. Would you agree that traffic is an important part of police work?
Traffic enforcement?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
And in many cities, traffic fatalities outnumber murders.
I suppose it could, yes.
All right. And in fact, when you look at property damage and traffic accidents, that would generally greatly exceed property damage and other criminal damage.
Would property damage and traffic accidents be more than the,
Property damage and criminal matters. So for example, let me give you
like in individual cases or
so
overall?
let's, if you took 10 accidents where 10, 25, 30, $50,000 cars were damaged, if you took 10 property damage cases, what do you think would be more? Traffic
Objection,
accidents
calls for
or
speculation.
property accidents? If he knows, he can say. If he doesn't know, he can say, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Were you aware that Officer Williams actually received a DUI award from Mothers Against Drunk Drivers?
Yes.
For the stops, the traffic stops, I'm sure the answer to this is no, but I want to ask it so the record's clear. You did not witness the reason for any of those car stops, did you?
On video, yes.
Okay, let's talk about in person first, and then we'll get to video. In person.
No.
On video, how many total OUI stops were there for Officer Williams?
Well, based on the numbers, I guess there'd be, what, 230?
Did you watch all 230 videos?
No.
The ones you watched, was there reasonable suspicion for him to make a stop?
On most.
Can you identify any one stop you made where there was not reasonable suspicion for a stop?
I recall one specific there, I think it was the 1100 block of Connecticut, where he is behind a vehicle that he says is weaving, and then says that it strikes the curb while parking along the west side of that street. In my observations of that video, the vehicle did not strike the curb, it struck a pothole. Officer Williams did not initiate a car stop. He went up there to make just, consensual contact with that driver. And when he made contact with that driver, he could smell alcohol, and that's where that began. So when he based his case that he saw this and then saw it strike the curb, I disagree with that.
Does the video start when the officer activates his overheads, or is it running all the time?
It's about 30 minutes behind, so if I were to start it right now, it's going to capture 30 seconds before.
Okay. So other than that one other stop, can you identify any others?
There was a stop there at Clinton Parkway in Iowa where he is turning left or turning north onto Iowa Street. There's a vehicle that's coming up on a yield sign he indicates that he had to slam on his brakes to avoid striking that vehicle or for it to strike him. And based off of my observations, I do not know if I agree with that.
So you're unsure?
I don't agree with that stop.
Oh, I thought you said, I don't know if I agree with
I'm going to clarify, I don't agree with
that. Okay. So 2 stops on 230, right?
Let me think about it. Those are all that I can talk to at this time.
Would you agree that the officer does not control who gets behind the wheel of the car and starts driving?
Absolutely.
Can we agree that if an officer sees a traffic violation, it's acceptable to stop the violator regardless of the gender of the driver?
Correct.
Can we agree that if a male officer has conducted 9 traffic stops for traffic violations, and all the drivers are women, if the officer sees another violation, and that driver happens to be a woman, the officer should not ignore the violation?
You shouldn't ignore the violation, no.
Okay, so in that example I just gave you, you could have a situation where 100% of the stops are female drivers, right?
In the example that you gave, I'm going to use the baseball analogy. I think that's a ball
Excuse me.
game.
I'm asking you about the question I asked you, not asking you to create an analogy of your own.
So what was the question again?
The question is, in the example that I gave you, 100% of those stops would be women, right?
For 9 stops, yes.
Or 10, if he makes the 10th stop, right?
Correct.
Okay. So one of the things that should be looked at for traffic stops is whether or not the reason for the stop was valid. Do you agree?
Correct.
Did the officer have reasonable suspicion to make the stop, right?
Correct.
Did you go through each of the 230 traffic stops and determine if, in your opinion, there was reasonable suspicion to make the stops?
I did not look at all the videos to this point.
We agree that Officer Williams worked up during evening hours most of the time when he was performing traffic stops.
Correct.
And did you do any analysis on the traffic stops to determine how many were made during daylight hours, how many were made during nighttime hours when it was dark?
No.
In most instances, would you agree that if the officer is following a vehicle from behind, let's say he's 8, 10 car lengths back, he cannot tell the gender of the driver?
Correct.
For each of the OUI arrests, did you look into, by Officer Williams, did you look into how many were initiated when he was behind?
No. Not specific that this stop started with him behind the vehicle.
Sure. Did you do any kind of general statistical analysis about, of the 230 stops, 40% were from observations when he was behind the vehicle?
No.
Are you familiar with radar? Police radar?
I can't speak fluent to it now.
Okay. I promise I won't ask you any really tough questions.
Please don't.
Are you at least generally familiar enough with radar to know that for oncoming vehicles, you can get a tone if the vehicle's 8, 10, 15 car lengths away as long as there's no obstructions?
No.
Did you look at video to determine how many of the stops were based upon radar for oncoming vehicles?
Not specific, no.
Give me general.
I cannot.
How many occurred on artificially lighted streets, streetlights?
I don't know.
How many occurred because Officer Williams observed some conduct from a side street?
You mean what, like stationary from a side street and
Yes,
saw
sir.
something occurring?
Either stopped at a stop sign or a stoplight, or was parked perpendicular to a street?
I didn't keep track of that.
You didn't look at
I didn't keep tally of that.
that? Okay. So you can't give us any numbers?
Correct.
So, I'm not trying to be silly when I ask this next question, but what does a woman look like?
What does a woman look like?
That's my question.
What age? Like a college age female?
Yes, let's look at 18 to 25.
What does a woman look like? That's an interesting question. I would say softer facial features compared to male. I'd say generally speaking, longer hair. Usually clothing is different. You can usually see the female anatomy that indicates that they are female.
Anything else?
No.
So softer facial features, you can't see that from behind, would you agree?
Correct.
Softer facial features, a car's coming at you at night at 6, 8, 10 car lengths away, you're not going to be able to make that distinction, would you agree?
Correct.
If someone's sitting in a car, to the extent you can see the driver, usually what you're seeing is pretty much, depending on the height of the person, shoulders up, is that right?
Generally speaking, yes.
So you're not going to see the anatomy.
Generally speaking, yes.
Okay, and you're really not going to see the clothing. Do you agree?
Well, I think that you can see like their tops, so if they're wearing a shirt, or wearing a dress, things along those lines. But generally speaking, yes.
Are you going to be able to see if a person is wearing a dress at night, if they're coming at you with their headlights on from 8 car lengths away?
From 8 car lengths away now.
Some women have short hair.
Yes.
Some women wear ball caps.
Yes.
In fact, there's officers that work for LPD that are female officers that have very short hair. Would you agree?
Yes.
I'll be close to witness. I'm not tripping. I placed in front of you a series of exhibits, and I want to direct your attention to exhibit number 19, I'm sorry, 18, if you turn to tab 18. Are you there?
I think so.
Do you recognize who that is?
Looks like Sergeant Shipley, I think. Or maybe not. I don't know.
Is that female?
I don't know.
Short hair?
Based off that angle, yes.
Ball cap?
Yeah.
Assuming someone as experienced as you knows what a selfie is, is that right?
I think I know what they are. My kids tell me otherwise.
Someone usually holds the camera out and takes a picture of themselves.
Okay,
right?
yes,
Does this look like a selfie that she took from arm's length?
looks like it.
And from looking at this at arm's length, you can't tell if this is a male or female.
No.
Move to admit Williams, 18.
I'd object to the foundation. He said he doesn't know who it is, for sure.
I don't think the name matters.
Well, I don't know if it's a true and accurate picture of what.
I'll represent to the panel that I can establish further foundation with Officer Williams. If you want to reserve ruling until then, that would be fine.
I think I will. I'm kind of at a loss here as to what we're trying to prove, maybe, with this picture. Hey.
Sure. And I'll get into that in closing argument. Exhibit 19. Would you turn to that tab, please? Do you recognize this female officer?
Yes,
Very short hair.
correct.
College, town, other women in Lawrence that basically have shaved heads.
Are there women that have shaved heads? Yes.
Williams Exhibit 20, would you turn to that, please? You recognize who that is?
I can't be for certain, but it looks like Officer's dad.
Female officer,
Correct.
short hair.
Correct.
Can you tell by the clothing whether she's a male or female?
By clothing alone? No.
Can you identify each LPD officer initiated OUI arrest? Strike that, start over. Can you identify each arrest? That's still not right. Try it a third time. For the officer-initiated activity on traffic that you looked at for Officer Williams, can you identify each stop where you have evidence that it was made, the stop was made because of gender, as opposed to reasonable suspicion of probable cause for traffic violation?
That the stop was made based off of gender? Is that the question?
Yes.
I don't have information.
Let's switch and talk about MIPs. You already agreed that you'd expect all those to be minors, is that right?
Correct.
And you know what a ladies' night is?
Yes.
Okay. How many of the times when Officer Williams went into the bars that he made MIP arrests, was he in there on a ladies' night?
I don't know.
Try to find out.
No.
Are the dates of the arrests on the ticket?
Yes.
If it was a ladies' night, might that change numbers?
Regarding his arrest? Or
Regarding
his-
MIP arrests in a bar. If it was a ladies' night.
I apologize, I'm not trying to be rude here. The question is, because on a ladies' night, would that affect his NTAs?
Let me try asking a different question, because I want to be sure you understand it before you answer. If you go into a bar on a ladies' night and you make arrests for MIPs, you would expect female arrests to be high on a ladies' night. Do you agree?
I don't agree, not necessarily, no.
Okay. You made reference when the state was questioning you about what Officer Williams told you about the MIPs. Let's look at what he actually put down. You look at Exhibit 9 again, please. He starts that out by saying, I have observed. Is that right?
Correct.
Paragraph 6. So if that was his observation, is that, do you know if that observation is true or false?
That he's observed.
Right.
That he's observed.
He says, I have observed during bar checks where there are college-aged individuals, as a general rule, males seem to be calmer even if they are minors and are more likely to say hello or high-five the officer. He says that's what he observed, right?
Correct.
Then he continues, on the other hand, females at times react differently, including attempted flight from the bar. This is something I was trained to watch for. That's what it says, right?
That's what it says, yes.
So to stop someone for suspicion of an MIP, you have to have a reasonable basis. Would you agree?
You need a reason for contact, yes.
Okay. So if a male high-fives you, that's not a reason for contact. Would you agree?
Correct.
If a female looks at you, hides her drink, or attempts to leave, that is a reason for contact. Is that right?
Hides a drink and attempts to leave both at the same time, yes.
How about either one of them alone?
They just attempt to leave.
After seeing you. In other words, they out the door.
So do they have a drink in their hand? Are they just standing there?
Yes, they'd have to have a drink to be in minor possession, right?
So if they turned around and walked away, that would be an indicator that maybe we need to look at that.
Okay. That would be an appropriate stop, wouldn't it?
Correct.
Are you aware of any evidence to suggest that when Officer Williams was in a bar doing an MIP check, that any male engaged in conduct giving the officer reasonable suspicion to make the stop other than the one?
I'm not aware.
So it's possible that when he went in there, other than one time, he doesn't see any males engaging in conduct that give him a reason to stop. True.
Correct.
Each MIP that is done has a report that goes with it. Is that right?
Generally speaking, yes, we need a report. Could be an actual narrative written, or it could be notes on the back of an NTA, something along those lines, generally speaking.
Did you read all of the notes or reports from MIPs?
All the ones that I can find, yes.
I want to ask you some questions about the statistics. Are you aware that in order to compare statistical data, you have to be comparing apples to apples?
I'm not a statistical expert, so apples to apples, should I compare the same thing?
Same types of things, right?
Generally speaking, yes, I understand that.
You talked about referring to national statistics. Are you aware, sir, that KU has a greater female population of students than males?
I believe that Officer Williams indicated that in his written statement.
Okay. Do you disagree with that?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Did you research that before coming to your findings?
No.
Okay, so when you looked at national statistics, were you just comparing college towns, or did you include a town like Goodland, Kansas?
I did not compare any one town. I compared the numbers that were provided by the FBI numbers.
If they're not apples to apples, do you think that's a fair comparison?
Generally speaking, I think it is a fair comparison.
So, you asked Officer Williams who was close to him in terms of making OUI and or MIP arrests, is that right?
Correct.
What he told you was no one had the same numbers that he did, right?
I do remember that.
He's significantly higher than all the other officers, is that right?
Correct.
So, do you know if those officers that you did compare worked in the same sector or quad, whatever the right name is, as Officer Williams?
Consistently, I do not.
Okay. So, you don't even know if the demographics within the quad that you use for comparisons are the same. Is that fair?
I know that in Lawrence, based off of our constant complaints from other establishments, that they want to know, why don't we go check other places? And everywhere else that we go check, because of everything centralized with the bars for college-age students, right, up there by KU or downtown, that if other officers are out in those areas, there's really nowhere to check. So, trying to understand the question, that these officers, that's where they would go to issue these citations.
That wasn't my question, sir.
Then what is it?
And feel free to ask me to repeat if you don't understand what I'm asking. I'd be happy to do that. My question is, did you compare the demographics of the areas that the officers were assigned to the demographics for the area that Officer Williams was assigned?
No.
So for Richardson, you noted that he issued tickets under MIPs 72% female, 28% male.
Correct.
Was he targeting females?
If you were to go purely by numbers, if you were purely to go by percentages, is there more females than males? Yes. Do I look at those numbers and say that he is targeting females? I would say no.
Because you can't just look at percentages, do you agree?
You have to look at the totality of it.
Precisely. You have to look at why a stop was made, right?
Correct.
You have to look at the articulated reason for the stop, correct?
Correct.
For MIPs, you can obviously tell the gender, but for traffic, you may or may not be able to. True.
Correct.
So let's talk about the arm brister complaint. He's your boss, right?
No.
He's not? Because you're LPD, he's SM.
Correct.
Thank you. So the complaint from arm brister states it's at number 6. So when you testified when the state was questioning you this afternoon, you said that because you were new, they waited a couple weeks before you began your investigation. Is that right?
Correct. And there was no specific complaint, meaning like there wasn't like a single incident. It was just kind of generally speaking.
Okay. Let's look at the date on State's Exhibit 6, top left, 8/14 of 2020. You see that? Yes?
Correct.
And you actually signed for this. Is that your signature on the bottom?
Now that's Chief Bracey's.
Okay. So he doesn't even sign it until 12/29/20.
Correct.
Okay. And did it strike you as being odd that someone who's in law enforcement, someone who's a sheriff at the time, does not give any specific comments or reasons as to why many, many years after Williams left the SO, that he's just now making this complaint?
I don't know.
Did you ever investigate as to whether or not Sheriff Armbruster might have a motive for making that complaint against this particular officer?
I did not.
And looking at your report, got too many notebooks going here.
No.
I want to look at the very last page where you sign it. Are you there, sir?
Okay.
Okay, so if you look at the paragraph toward the top, it starts out with this investigation. You see that paragraph?
What's it start with?
It starts out with this investigation.
The very last paragraph?
If you look toward the top, there's the last page,
Okay.
the one with your signature on it.
All
The
right.
first paragraph starts with female and. You see that? I don't think we're on the same page. On this page where your signature is.
And then you want me to start where?
Right here.
Okay.
Go to that page.
So this investigation did not determine?
Right.
Okay.
You're looking at a draft and your pages are a little bit different
Correct.
than my pages.
Right.
Okay, so I want to read this and tell me if I'm reading correctly. This investigation did not determine a specific reason as to why there was such a remarkable difference between Officer Williams' OUI arrests and issued NTAs for MIP compared to other officers and the entire Lawrence Police Department. Did I read that correctly?
You did.
But then you go on to say you believe it shows a pattern cover, right?
Correct.
So you never figured out the why.
Correct.
You mentioned Officer, is it Officer Wills or Deputy Wills?
Officer.
Officer Wills. Let's look at the report again. If you turn to the section where it talks about your contact with him. So if you see the paragraph, second from the bottom of this section, it says, I asked Officer Wills if there was any known reason for Officer Williams arresting more females than males. You see that? So I asked Officer Wills if there was any known reason for Officer Williams arresting more females than males. And then her answer, as contained in the report, said Officer Wills said she did not know why this was occurring, correct?
Correct.
And then in the next paragraph, the very last sentence, she says, Officer Wills ended by saying she does not know if Officer Williams targets anyone. And then the last part of the sentence is, but the evidence tends to show that he does.
Correct.
Okay. So she said she doesn't know if he's really targeting, right?
Correct.
What she's hearing on the radio is him calling out, for example, if someone is checking, if he calls in like a license for a check, or if he would type it in on a computer, she could get into those screens and see all that, right?
Is that what she's hearing She could be hearing that, yes.
I thought you said earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong, that she was concerned, based upon listening to radio traffic, about females that Officer Williams would stop.
Correct.
Do you think a probative question would be what the reasonable suspicion was for making the stop, and whether or not Officer Williams could tell if it was a male or female before he made the decision to make the stop?
That could be asked, yes.
Did you ask her that?
I believe that the only probing question similar to what you're asking is if they took into consideration the difference between self-initiated calls and dispatch calls.
That wasn't my question. My question was, did you ask her if she knew the reason for the stop?
I did not.
All right, now when you were testifying, you talked about some instances where Officer Williams had made an arrest for someone being intoxicated and decided to run a vehicle. Is that correct?
Correct. And on multiple occasions that's happened.
Okay. And it's your testimony that you wouldn't do that, right?
Correct. Not just someone sitting in a car, no.
Okay. The person, if they're in a running vehicle, they're behind the driver's seat, they have control of that vehicle, is that right?
I don't know the case law behind running vehicles, no UIs. I just know specific to my experience that I would not arrest somebody for doing that.
All right. So you can't sit here and tell this panel whether being intoxicated and having control over a vehicle, if it's parked or stopped, is a violation according to who you are. Would that be fair?
Correct.
You realize officers have discretion on whether or not they want to make an arrest or not make an arrest. If it's lawful, would you agree?
They have a wide range of discretion. That's correct.
Right. And I'm sure your experience enough lieutenant, you know that, there's some officers that never in their life are going to write a jaywalking ticket, and there's other officers that might write a jaywalking ticket, right?
Correct.
Okay. So you also mentioned Officer Williams stopping people who were walking down the sidewalk to see if they were okay. Is that right?
Correct.
They were horsing around. He didn't know if they were horsing around, something like that, right?
Correct.
Do you think that's an appropriate reason for a stop?
For contact, yes. I think it can't be an appropriate reason.
And you were critical of Officer Williams for writing the female ticket for fake driver's license, is that correct?
Correct.
Is that a violation of law, fake driver's license?
Correct.
Okay. And then there's another one where you said it was a Bullwinkle's, and again, there was a fake driver's license, is that right?
I believe that the female was heavily intoxicated, fell down, and during that contact, the fake DL was located, yes.
Okay. And that's a violation of law, can we agree?
Possession of fake driver's license, yes.
You also mentioned you talked to Officer Kennedy, and she said she was stopped for speeding 3 times.
Lieutenant Ernst spoke with Officer Kennedy.
Thank you for correcting me. So you did not speak with him?
Correct.
All right. And how fast was Kennedy going the first time?
I don't know how fast she was going.
Did she deny she was speeding? How fast was she going the second time?
I do not know.
Did she deny she was speeding?
No.
Third time she claimed she was only going 2 miles an
Correct.
hour. Did Officer Williams write her a ticket any of those 3 times?
None of the times, none of the 4 times that she was stopped.
Those are all questions I have. Thank you, Lieutenant.
Thank you.
Quick redirect. in Lawrence, generally, what is the artificial lighting? What is the street lights situation?
Generally, I think they're LEDs, your normal street lights.
And would you say it's a well-lit town, or does it just depend on the area?
It depends on where you're at. I
Okay.
think, running down Mass, of course, it's lit up like a Christmas tree. Around the bar area, there's lighting at your intersections, but there in the 100 blocks, there's very little of it. Along your main thoroughfares, it's well lit. It just depends on where you're at.
And regarding an MIP arrest, unlike an OUI, you would be up close and personal with the person, correct?
Correct.
And in most instances, you would know the gender of the person.
Immediately.
You were asked on Cross about ladies' night, and there's sort of the insinuation that there would be more ladies at ladies' night. Is that your understanding of what ladies' night is in Lawrence?
I'm 44. I've been out to ladies' night. I've been married for 23 years. Let's just make sure we all know that. So you tell my wife that. No, I'm sorry. Generally speaking, I don't know if that means that there's more women or more men. I would think that by them having a ladies' night would be to draw that crowd. Of course, then get the males to show up.
And it's been a while since you've been on the street, correct?
It's been 7 years.
But when you were on the street, is it true that ladies' night would be the ladies get in free, and then as you said, that brings them in?
I believe that's how it works.
Was that your experience when you were patrolling at that time?
Yes.
So to say that ladies' night means there's just ladies, is that correct?
It's not just ladies. There's men and women inside the bar, so it's not just all ladies' night. It's ladies' night so that they come in for free, so hopefully more show up, so more men show up.
And was your conclusion or sustaining the complaint of bias-based policing based solely on the statistics?
Can you ask that again?
When you sustained bias-based policing, did you do that only on the numbers, or were there other components to your investigation that led to that decision?
It was not just based on the numbers.
No further questions.
Nothing further.
All right. Can this witness be excused?
I would ask that you be excused.
We agree.
And then thank you for your time, and you are.
I appreciate it.